Welcome everybody to the Damage Report here on a Friday. Finally, the end of this effing week. I am your effing host, Francesca Fiorentini. There are a lot of F's in my name. In for John Iadarola, who's being the bestest dad ever. We think, we assume. And with me on this Friday, of course, Fantastic Friday, is Brett Erlich.
Yep.
Brett, what's up?
I'm Brett, your bestest BS host on this BS Friday. Anyways, but I'm very happy to be here. Big thanks to Jordan Ewell for selecting me as the first person to receive this LeVar Burton shirt. It wasn't that I had to guilt him into sending me one, / I had to, I don't know, whatever. This is it. Read banned books. Francesca got one for free, so it's fine. It's fine.
Whoa,
I'm not bitter. I got a compliment
on the playground for wearing it. It says LeVar Burton says read banned books, and it's great. And everyone should get one. You can support Move On and get your book. Rock it on the playground. There we go.
It was great because you wear the shirt, you go out and you read Mein Kampf.
Yes.
You have a nice little Saturday. You read,
and then you're like
a lot of weird anime at a playground. That's it.
Right, you're like, say something. Yeah. That is good. We're gonna get into, there's some culture war stuff later, obviously, not book bans today, but really how right-wing influencers are absolutely putting specifically LGBTQ people in the crosshairs of dangerous folks, as we know. We're obviously gonna talk about Biden's big speech from the Oval Office on the Israel Hamas war, and we are going to be talking about Jim Jordan. Yeah, he decided to run again, and it didn't go so well in trying to become the House Speaker. And honestly, I say that's fine. I mean, take a little snoozer, okay? We don't actually need a Republican-led Congress in action right now. It might be good to have them missing in action. And then we're gonna get into, of course, our garbage people for the week. So stay tuned, do what you do. You gotta like the stream, you gotta share it right now. Let people know what you get into on a Friday. Staying up on the news with your two favorite people. And send in your comments and super chats. We'll be reading them in our social breaks. But with that, Brett, are you ready to get this Friday started?
Whether I am or not, you've been more than fair.
Yes, you have no choice. And we have no choice because here we are thrust into yet another US-backed war. Let's begin with this.
That's why tomorrow I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine. It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations.
A smart investment that's going to pay dividends on our security for generations. It sounds like I'm being sold a timeshare in Florida, which actually is really, really not a wise investment, as we'll talk about later. It also sounds like I'm being sold another war. So that was Joe Biden addressing the nation from the Oval Office on Thursday evening. He had a 15-minute long speech that focused on US's support of Israel's war on Gaza, as well as the US's support for Ukraine's resistance to Russia's war on that country. Specifically, he's asking for $74 billion more dollars for both of these countries, again, that we have funded, long funded for many years. $61 billion for Ukraine, $14.3 billion for Israel. We're gonna get into what he said, and we're gonna get into the reactions from his own State Department, from staffers on the Hill, and also from the American people. How are they feeling about this new war on Gaza, on the Palestinian people, in response to, of course, the Hamas attacks that claimed so many lives? So we'll talk about that, but let's first stick with this speech. There were a lot of parallels. Biden here is trying to sell us, right? He's trying to sell the American people. Ukraine is Israel. Israel is Ukraine. Here's how he started out.
You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine. People that were very badly hurt since Putin launched his all-out invasion.
Now, I'm sure everyone has different thoughts about this tactic. I, for one, think it is a pretty bad parallel to draw. And I say that because in the Ukraine-Russia instance, Russia is the aggressor, of course, and Ukraine is fighting for its sovereign territory as Russia tries to annex places like Crimea, annex eastern Ukraine, annex the entire country. And when you look at Israel, Palestine, and you talk about annexation, you don't have to come on either side of this issue to know that it's Israel that has been slowly annexing places like the West Bank, trying to now annex northern Gaza. Annexation and settlements are kind of what Israel does. They claim for their own security. You can argue, yes, that is true, or no, that is not true, but that is what's happening. And it's very strange to me that here we are funding opposite sides of these two different wars. In my opinion, one side the aggressor in Israel, and on the other side, one's the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their sovereignty. And somehow we're not supposed to see that dissonance. Instead, we're supposed to see them as the exact same struggle. Brett, I am curious about your thoughts. I guess I feel like I can only come back to the color of these folks' skin, their religion. I know that's a really reductive way to see it, but it's hard not to see it like that when it seems like there is such dissonance here.
No. It is wrong. The only similarity, really, there's two similarities between backing Israel and backing Ukraine. It's that they both serve American interests. That's where you need to stop the parallels, because otherwise you're just being reductive. And when you say the difference is the color of the people's skin, I mean, there's a lot of people that the US has allied itself with over the course of this, especially if you look at like who's benefiting and who's working with whom in that region. You've got, Iran and Palestine and Iran-backed groups, and you've got like Saudi Arabia and Israel and the UAE and the US and Egypt. Now, that's like a multi-ethnic different coalitions on those different sides. You've got Arabs versus Arabs. You got, traditionally Persian people aligning with Arabs. You got people in Saudi Arabia disavowing Palestinians as Arabs. Like it's very, the further down you go, the more dangerous it is. So this is the thing with a lot of these discussions, they end up going down and they end up going into these places where you feel like you absolutely need to win some rhetorical framing. And I mentioned this last week, when really just stop at, they both further American interests. American geopolitical interests is in having Israel as an ally. When you say like, who's the aggressor in Russia versus Ukraine, Russia's the aggressor. When you look at the aggressor in Israel versus Hamas and / Palestine, depending on how you want to frame it yourself for whatever ends, like it's this particular war started with aggression from Hamas in killing a bunch of Israelis. And this is considered, that was the instigating factor in this war. So technically you have some element of invasion and aggression from Hamas. But as I said last week too, like most people just pick the starting point that best serves their interests based on what side they are, and they go from there. And I'd say all of that is wrong. When I do it, when you do it, when anyone does it, remembering like the only parallel I can draw is that they're both in the American geopolitical interest as framed by like America as hegemon since World War II.
History has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising.
Right, so there he is basically saying that if we don't do something now, that this will only get worse. And he says dictators, and again, he's applying that sort of broadly to both of these, I would say, very disparate wars and conflicts. I may agree with him when it comes to Putin. I definitely don't see a dictator in Palestine in terms of, they're being called terrorists because they're effectively stateless people, which they are. There is no real state of Palestine. It is a bunch of controlled territories controlled by the Israeli government, ultimately, who has the ability to shut off water, electricity. Currently, there is humanitarian aid stuck at the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza right now, still hasn't been able to reach people. But Brett, I'm curious about this because this is an American public that has dealt with 20 plus years of the war on terror that, effectively the president he served under, Barack Obama, tried to wind down while ramping up in Afghanistan, and that ultimately he did exit Afghanistan, kind of closing the chapter on the war on terror in terms of American history. And now he's saying, no, we have to keep on going because these dictators will only continue. And my reaction when I see that is, I look at US history involvement in the Middle East and I say, where have we made it better? I'm still waiting on that one to know that our involvement in the Middle East has actually taught us that we did a good thing.
Yeah, we definitely have not made it better anywhere that pops into my mind in the Middle East. And it's in that, I can't remember if it was in that clip, but elsewhere in the speech, he goes like, we made some mistakes. America's made some mistakes. We don't want to make those same mistakes. So he does invoke like, yeah, Iraq bad, oops, might be. That's created a power vacuum that really is, and you've hit it. It's America at this decision point of, okay, without us, what happens in the region? So it was, Britain and France dividing up places with cool, like, let's just draw a straight line through this entire ethnic group. Like that was essentially how it went. Like if you look at the borders of Syria, Iraq, like there's these straight lines, like through the Kurds. Like we don't care. The way specifically Britain is at dividing territory and who they think is in charge there that drives their parsing of land or whatever is so bad. Unfortunately, it doesn't get to be comedic. But in this situation, I think the difference is, Israel is the strategic foothold that America has reliably in the Middle East, and we have broadened we used to be fighting, the USSR for influence, and now we are fighting Russia, China, and other countries for Iran for who's going to be in charge of it for the next 100 years. And what no one really thinks through, what we need to remember is like Iran is how Iran is because we were like super duper cool friends with the Shah, and that really angered a lot of people. And then there was an Islamic revolution that gave us this iteration of it. Yeah. There's some fascinating, but yeah, I'll stop talking.
No, I think it's you bring really good history, and I think we'll talk offline about how that history applies also to Israel, Palestine. But I do want to just mention a few other things that he said. He did not call for a ceasefire. Brett mentioned China. This is obviously one of our geopolitical rivals. China, the president of China, Xi Jinping, has called for a ceasefire, as have many leaders around the world. Biden also did say that 32 Americans were killed in Israel by Hamas. A lot of those Americans might have dual citizenship with Israel and the United States. He said that Americans were being held by Hamas still. He did not name the numbers, which I found very worrying, but he didn't give specific numbers as to how many Americans are still being held by Hamas. He said that he was working and that the United States was working to free those hostages, but did not offer concrete plans as to how they were going to be freed. So I think that also leaves a door open for some questions. He also called Hamas's attack on Israelis depraved. I think everyone can agree. And yet, when he talked about Palestinian loss of life or the killing of Palestinians by Israel, which is what is currently happening right now, we're talking about over 4,000 civilians who've been killed in Gaza. He said, quote, he's heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life. There's no actor in that sentence. There is no one doing the killing. Palestinians just lose their lives. So I think that was an interesting thing to note.
Today, Jewish families worried about being targeted in school, wearing symbols of their faith, walking down the street, or going out about their daily lives. And I know many of you in the Muslim American community, the Arab American community, the Palestinian American community, and so many others are outraged and hearted, saying to yourselves, here we go again with Islamophobia and distrust we saw after 9/11.
So I found this to be like a really interesting admission of the fact that many American Muslims and Arab Americans are rightfully scared at this moment, in addition to American Jews who, yes, many of them have been protesting in DC, but also many of them have been on high alert. And this entire well, here we go again. And given that this is being called Israel's 9/11, Brett, I don't feel like that's that fear that here we go again of the hate crimes, here we go again of the Islamophobia, here we go again. I feel like that fear is founded, and I don't see this president doing much to allay that fear that this isn't exactly what we saw happen after 9/11.
I mean, there's a lot there. The word admission is interesting to use, but when I listened to this speech, I was like, he's hitting a lot of things. I'm glad he at least hit. I mean, right. Not ignoring that. And that's basically Biden's presidency. Biden's presidency is like, is he awake? God, what has he done? Then checks notes and like, there's some good stuff in here. Like, how did you do that with having a brain made of wet toilet paper? Like that's what it feels like to have a Biden presidency and just be like, I don't get it. It's like, he's got old man strength in a way where you're just like, how are you lifting that box? You look like it's heavier than you.
Well, I think this is a box that is way too heavy for Joe Biden. But before you continue, let's go, because he did name specifically again the 6-year-old who was murdered outside of Chicago. So let's listen to him.
Just last week, a mother was brutally stabbed. A little boy here in the United States, a little boy who just turned 6 years old was murdered in their home outside of Chicago. His name was Wadiha, a proud American, a proud Palestinian American family. We can't stand by and stand silent when this happens. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia.
So there he did name Wadiha Al-Fayoume, who was stabbed by his neighbor in this hate crime. I just want to point something out there. He said, we cannot stand by. We cannot stand by. What must we do? I'm waiting. I'm really excited for what we're gonna do to stop Islamophobia, hate crimes, and anti-Semitism. What are we gonna do? We're going to condemn. Okay.
What do you want him to do? Just out of curiosity, like what is the right thing to do in that situation?
I think he needs to understand that basically, first of all, if you want to actually help, there are organizations right now like CARE, Council on Islamic Relations, that has to move their meetings because of death threats. So if you want, you could actually call on them. You could call on the hotel. You could tweet out a statement of support for them. You could, I don't know, you could send security to help them if you truly wanted to help both Muslims and Jews. There could be extra security at synagogues, extra security at mosques, but there could also be some kind of attempt to de-escalate what is clearly an out of control, both war as well as rhetoric that is leading to things like these hate crimes being committed against this 6-year-old, that is leading to people having to fear for their lives, getting death threats and such. So it's like what we are doing, you're doing with one hand is, oh yeah, let's condemn. And the other hand, you're like, oh, more war. And you're just fanning the flames, you're lighting that match. So that's what I would like. I'd like a de-escalation. I'd like for the calls for ceasefire not to just come from the crazy squad and these crazy liberal Jews who are out there, progressive Jews saying ceasefire. They're just nuts. No, they're not. They're calling for something so basic right now, which is an end to the death on all sides. And hell, a negotiation for the people who might still be alive, the Israelis who might still be alive within Gaza. Have we forgotten about them? That's what I'd like.
I'm all for a ceasefire. I'm all for, like, it happened. This enough has happened for everybody to be at a point where they felt like they, whatever the horrible words are, like saved face, did what they have to do. But a lot of it in this scenario, in this region, is like this statecraft, and it's sloppy, and some of it happens. And then that's the only speech Biden can give. And he gave it in a way that's more like acknowledging of realities than than Trump would. And then you have to give signs of solidarity with your allies, your known allies. You're not going to change on them because any move you make will be seen. So you got to do some stuff. But he absolutely needs to do the stuff that I will never be able to confirm whether he did. He needs to, behind the scenes, get in a room with Benjamin Netanyahu, find a way to say, all right, it's enough. Find some kind of leverage in that scenario to say, stop it, because you did the thing that is like, yes, Israel punches harder. Right. That's all. That's it. That's what you need to do in this scenario. And then in 8 months, we need to ceasefire now. And in 8 months, let's get back on two-state solution track. That's what he needs to do.
Welcome back to the Damage Report. Francesca Fiorentini here, Brett Erlich there. Some breaking news, Brett, in addition to apparently 2 American hostages being released by Hamas. This is huge. We'll probably cover it more on Monday, but thanks so much, producers, for letting me in on that. There's also news that Kenneth Chesebro, that is part of, I guess was he another lawyer, Brett, or was he just an advisor to Donald Trump during his 2020 presidential campaign and part of the enterprise in the RICO case?
He's a pro-Trump attorney who basically, now I don't know exactly what specifically he's pled guilty to, and I'll pull it up and maybe be able to read it.
Well, he's pled guilty. He's pled guilty.
Right, but he's a pro-Trump. He was accused of basically crafting the whole conspiracy to subvert the election.
Just a little thing like that. I mean, it's like I wouldn't put that at the top of your resume, but it depends. You know how you like send resumes, different ones to different people. Depending on who he's seeking work with next. But yeah, we'll report that in more detail. There's going to be a lot of reacts to that in the next few hours and over the weekend. So stay tuned on Monday. I'll be back. I think I'm back on Monday. But let's jump into this, guys, because while President Joe Biden is very much going to the wall for Benjamin Netanyahu and supporting Israel in every which way in their assault on Gaza right now, leading to the mass exodus of Palestinians as well as their death. It seems that people in his own cabinet are actually sounding the alarm, specifically within the State Department. State Department officials told HuffPost that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and his most senior advisors are overlooking widespread internal frustration. Some department staff said they feel as if Blinken and his team are uninterested in their own experts' advice as they focus on supporting Israel's expanding operation in Gaza, where the Palestinian militant group Hamas is based. This is from a State Department official saying there's basically a mutiny brewing within state at all levels. 2 officials told HuffPost that diplomats are preparing what's called a dissent cable, which is a document criticizing American policy that goes to the agency's leaders through a protected internal channel. So that's a huge step. Apparently there was a call to have a dissent cable during Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan. One was never issued, but now in fact it looks like imminently there will be a cable issued from dozens of State Department officials saying they disagree with the direction that Joe Biden is taking when it comes to its US support of Israel in this war. This is after a man named Josh Paul, who was an 11-year State Department veteran at the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs, resigned over Biden's handling of Israel's war. And he thought he was going to be a pariah. When he resigned, he thought, that's it for me. No one's going to support me in this. And in fact, the opposite happened. He said, quote, in the last 24 hours, I've been getting an immense amount of outreach from colleagues with very encouraging, really encouraging words of support, and a lot of people saying they feel the same way, and it's very difficult to them. Again, more from the inside of the State Department. One official described peers as, quote, depressed and angry about it, while another said some staff are experiencing resignation. That official recalled a colleague in tears during a meeting over their view that, quote, the US policy statements emphasize support for Israel over the lives of Palestinians. Now, this matters And it has mattered for many, many decades when it comes to this issue. I want to turn to a former Pentagon and Department of Homeland Security official, Sarah Harrison, who we can jump down to graphic 7, who tweeted, "This is an environment that has been cultivated by Democratic and Republican administrations alike," Harrison wrote. "If you work in federal government and question anything Israel does, you are silenced and sidelined." Sideline and silence, I can read. Now, I think before I kick it to you, Brett, I think that's important given not just what's happening in Israel-Palestine, but given the implications that this war could have for the broader Middle East. And this is getting not that much coverage, but in the last few days, there has been attacks and attempted attacks on American targets and American troops, specifically in Syria and in Iraq. So drones and rockets targeted on Thursday evening the Ain al-Assad air base, which hosts US and other international forces in Western Iraq. Multiple blasts were heard inside the base, 2 security sources said. Thursday's attack is the 3rd in less than 24 hours against air bases which house US troops in Iraq. And they were targeted in 2 separate drone attacks, with one causing minor injuries to a small number of troops, even though the US military managed to intercept the armed drone. So, and this was actually after militant groups inside Iraq said, there will be retaliation for the US's support of Israel in its war on Gaza and the Palestinians. Look, however you feel about what's going on, I think it can be questioned as to whether or not, as President Biden said, this war will pay dividends to American security. I'm sadly old enough to remember 9/11, be in New York, in Manhattan on 9/11, and wonder, why the hell is this happening? What is going on? And lo and behold, learning a whole history of the United States' work, the United States' support of actors, dictators, and yes, is Israel, that ultimately led to atrocities and things like 9/11 and everything that happened after it. Again, does anyone say that I'm supporting or not condemning bin Laden? No, I was blocks away from ground zero. I just don't want this to happen again. Oh my God. But Brett, just reactions to that. Interesting to see this dissent within this administration.
I mean, hopefully there's dissent in every administration that yields actual conversations with each other, that yields smart decisions. I don't like to hear things like, listen, everybody's had a job where they feel like they submitted their idea, no one liked it, and they feel like they're being, alienated. That's possible, but it's also very possible that in the same way that there's general power dynamics in many offices, people have their whole career set up, and it is very obvious how to get to the top. And you can't say certain things along the way that are not illegal to say, but they're probably not advantageous for you to say, but they are important to say. Yeah. And you should not have an environment in the Pentagon or anywhere else that discourages people from sharing vital information. You should be able to have all of these conversations, and whether the decision goes your way or not, there should not be this feeling that if you, as an expert on an area, share your expertise on this area, you should not feel like you're sidelined for that just because that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I feel like when it comes to the Middle East, this has been decades, right? It's like the people who tell you the thing you want to hear get promoted, and the people who tell you the reality on the ground, are the ones who get sidelined, and it's very frightening. And I don't think there are radicals in the State Department. These are sort of career bureaucrats who understand the region, and yet they're saying, yeah, this president is moving in the wrong direction, and they're worried. So we will stay tuned for that cable if and when it comes. But let's move to the American people. How are Americans reacting to the US's support of Israel's war on Gaza and the continued request for more and more billions of dollars for money for weapons? Not well, actually. Interestingly, according to a new CBS YouGov poll, a lot of Americans are out of step with their own president, Joe Biden, on this issue. There's just a couple of questions that was posed to these folks, asking, should the United States send weapons or supplies to Israel? Only 47% of Democrats said they should, and 57% of Republicans, but the majority of Democrats, said should not, 53%, and 55% of independents, which I think is really interesting because that's sort of could swing either way. And 43% of Republicans said they should not. So overwhelming majority of Americans say no more weapons, we should not, which I think is pretty striking at a time like this. Let's continue on though. This I thought was even more striking. The question was Israel-Hamas conflict. What should the US do now? And the number one thing that 76% of Americans said, send humanitarian aid to Israel. That is not the same as sending weapons, but send humanitarian aid to Israel. 72% use diplomacy with countries in the region for the love of God. Sorry, that's me and that's 72% there. 57% say send humanitarian aid to Palestinians, so a lot less, but still the majority of Americans. And then again, only 48% say send weapons and supplies to Israel. I just want to stop down and note how striking that is. And as someone who has been around and covered many different attacks and retaliations for attacks between Hamas and Israel, attacks in the West Bank on protesters and whatnot. This is one of the first times I've seen the American public so out of step with their government on this issue, and saying, hey, whoa. Let's do food, let's do aid, let's do diplomacy because this could get out of hand.
Yeah, I love polls like this because you read them and then you read the news afterwards and it's like, listen, 76% said we should send humanitarian aid to Israel. What better humanitarian aid is there than bombs? Like, and then you have people say like, listen, there is no support for this war when no one calculates that that's roughly like 51-48, you know? Or 48% says we should send weapons and supplies to Israel. It's similar to the poll that I saw that was like 80% of people think that this is Benjamin Netanyahu's fault. And then they're like, everyone just cherry picks what that means when it probably means that like, that's great for a coalition building representative parliament where you have a bunch where it's a mix of people who are like, this guy's a psychopath, and people who are like, this guy wasn't psychopath enough not to have killed everyone yet. And all of these are exactly the kind of calculus that are factors in the calculus that the government has to play out. That's both public opinion and overall general, what they consider as the elected experts and the experts who have entered the State Department as what's in the best interest of America, against the backdrop of like, at what point of support did wars we ended up getting out of have, which is like 30, 20. That's like when we start saying, oh, we've lost everybody, like historically for American war support.
Yeah. Sadly, when it comes to war, the American public has little voice. And I think that's why you're seeing people on the streets now. Jim Jordan has once again lost his bid to become speaker. That is the third time in this week, and by the biggest margin. Again, usually you're supposed to go in the opposite direction, and you get fewer and fewer no votes. He's getting more and more no votes. But just a little bit ago, there has also been a secret GOP ballot as to whether Jordan should drop out or not. We're gonna get the results, I believe, shortly. What's crazy about this, guys, is that if you follow the news on Thursday morning, Jim Jordan was not going to run again. He, in fact, was going to pass the baton to the acting speaker, Patrick McHenry, and say, look, I'm out, guys. Then there was a GOP meeting. Maybe it wasn't secret. And they were like, what the hell are you doing? You get back in there and you get the goddamn votes. And so he got back in there and he lost yet again. So there are three more folks jumped on the not Jordan train. We're talking Tom Keene Jr., Brian Fitzpatrick, and Mark Molinaro. I don't know why I can't say that right. Let's throw up this graphic right here, and you can sort of see from first to third round here how many he's losing. Look at Jeffries losing 2 votes. Where did those guys go? Are they just at lunch or something?
Yeah, I wonder if you add them up. I've seen reports that in the third vote, all Democrats voted for Jeffries. So it might have been all the present Democrats.
Got it. But so there you go, 25, he cannot close that gap. So this was Jordan yesterday, I guess. We'll see what he says today, but this is what he said yesterday about why he decided, oh no, I'm back in the race. Take a look.
We made the pitch to members on the resolution as a way to lower the temperature and get back to work. We decided that wasn't where we're going to go. I'm still running for speaker, and I plan to go to the floor and get the votes and win this race. But I want to go talk with a few of my colleagues. Particularly, I want to talk with the 20 individuals who voted against me so that we can move forward and begin to work for the American people.
Well, he ran out of time there, guys, because he didn't talk to the people who flipped against him in that third vote. But finally, we talked about this yesterday, Brett, but the tactics that are being used to cajole Republicans into voting for Jim Jordan are things like texting their wives, which is, kind of a scary tactic generally. Here's Ken Buck, who I believe was one of the people who flipped. Oh no, sorry, who did not vote for Jim Jordan, talking about all the threats, the death threats actually, and the other pressure he's received for opposing Jordan as speaker.
Part of the reason that there's temper right now is this constant barrage of phone calls. I have 6 full-time people answering the phones. I have 20,000 messages from people where we couldn't. So far, I've had 4 death threats. I've been evicted from my office in Colorado. I have notice of an eviction because the landlord is mad with my voting record on the speaker issue. And everybody in the conference is getting this. So it's natural. Family members have been approached and threatened. All kinds of things are going on. There's going to be some tension.
4 death threats, Congressman, because you're not supporting Jim Jordan?
That's right.
Okay, that's just wild. Like, that is absolutely insane. Brett, I want your reactions to what the MAGA movement has really done to the Republican Party here.
Well, we'll see. I mean, America has like this very short memory in a 24-second news cycle. And so who knows, like after this all happens and it shakes out, like they're like, oh my God, can you believe McCarthy was ousted as Speaker of the House? Everything was so fine. And they forgot that it took 18 votes to get the guy in the first place. I think the worst thing we can do for America is to have Jim Jordan as Speaker of the House. It's not going for Jim Jordan when he, for the first time in his entire life, says, let's bring the temperature down on this. Like that guy, him being Speaker of the House is going to be the absolute worst thing in the universe because he's just the crappiest.
Yeah. I just think it's really surprising. I mean, it's not surprising at all, but the ways that Republicans are getting the death threats from their own party, their own caucus, and they have a question to answer, which is, are we going to be strong-armed by the lunatics in the base or not? And the answer to that is always and usually been yes. But what's interesting is that here you actually not just have, I think politically they're on board with Jordan. They're not resistant to Jordan because of his politics. They're resistant because they don't like his approach, because he's not doing a good enough job in broaching their support, getting their support. He's not promising them anything that they want to hear. He's not delivering even the manner clearly in which he's trying to get the votes. Same with Kevin McCarthy. Clearly they are failing. They are not able to reach a consensus. They're not able to bring their caucus on board. So it is beyond the politics, but it's interesting that the backlash is very much in line with some of the politics that they have fanned the flames of, which is violence. A police officer named Miles Cosgrove. He was a Louisville police officer who was fired for fatally shooting Breonna Taylor in that 2020 police raid. He actually never faced any charges and in fact was rehired. He was rehired just outside of Louisville, about an hour away in Carroll County. There he is, just chilling. He actually, again, he was involved in that police raid that killed Breonna Taylor. And on Monday, it seems like he's not been doing the people of Carroll County much good. On Monday, he rammed a resident's truck with his cruiser and then pointed a gun at an owner and several bystanders, witnesses say. This is a little bit of a story. We're gonna go into what happened. Witnesses told the Courier-Journal that Cosgrove barreled into the Happy Hollow trailer park at a high rate speed without his emergency lights on, then struck William Joshua Short's pickup truck with such force, it sent the vehicle flying into a building, breaking off 2 cinder blocks. Cosgrove's cruiser then struck another car, damaging its rear end. That being said, the guy whose truck got hit, that guy was charged with endangerment of a police officer and fleeing and invading the police, even though witnesses say he didn't try to flee. So you got your car hit by a police officer, and then anyway, why did this happen? Why was Cosgrove even on the scene? It began when a truck driver named Charles White of Owenton said he saw a trailer he reported stolen being pulled down a road behind a silver or blue pickup truck. He reported the sighting into Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and meanwhile, Alexis Mobley, who was riding in the truck with Short and Short's sister, Jessie, called 911 to report a man that was following them, waving a handgun out the window, and that he had fired at them. Charles White said he wasn't waving a gun, it was a cell phone. So again, this is a guy who reports a stolen pickup truck. He thinks he sees it. The people in the pickup truck are like, what the hell? There's someone following us. Both call 911. And who shows up? But your man, Cosgrove. Short was in jail. This is again the guy's pickup truck it was. He was in jail Wednesday, could not be reached for comment, but his sister and Mobley said Short was about to park his truck so he could talk to the police when Cosgrove rammed him. White said in an interview that Cosgrove was blocking an exit from the trailer park when Short rammed him. And then Mobley and Jessie Short, again, these are the people who had the pickup truck, who had the trailer. They were charged with disorderly conduct and menacing and released after a night in jail on a $1,000 bond. Other witnesses say women were shouting at Cosgrove and calling him a murderer. The two women said the Carrollton police who came up behind Cosgrove told them they were talking too much. So, Brett, there's a reason why we don't reassign cops who are involved in fatal shootings, like the Breonna Taylor shooting. And it's just, the guy's a mess. And I'm just glad that nobody got killed. But thoughts on this incident?
For a lot of this, there will be more information that comes out. The sad part is the more times you do obviously bad stuff, like hiring the guy who did the thing he got fired for, like when that happens, you're losing trust from the community. So now it's like, I have doubt about the report you're going to write. I have doubt about that. And that's just a microcosm of that happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times. You just can't, I mean, this guy, if you hire the guy who did the stuff we know he did with Breonna Taylor, stuff like this has a potential to happen if you put him on the street in a car doing that stuff. If you want to hire him, put him behind a desk. So the worst thing he can do is ram his chair into another chair at the office. But you can't put this person back out there. It's just malpractice at that point.
Yeah, we've all seen The Wire, or at least those of us with taste have seen The Wire. Yeah, you assign him to a desk job.
Belusky.
Exactly, Prez. Just for a recap, the other officers who were involved in the shooting of Breonna Taylor, the killing of Breonna Taylor, charges against defendants Joshua Janes, Kyle Meany, Brett Hankinson, and Kelly Goodlett include civil rights violations, conspiracy, use of excessive force, offenses, and obstruction. Charging documents and state that the three officers lied in order to obtain a warrant they used to search Taylor's apartment in an act that violated federal civil rights and led to Taylor's death. They've been charged federally. There have not been convictions yet. Again, Cosgrove did escape those charges, but there's only one reason why neighbors would be calling him a murderer, right? They're like, why are you sending us this guy? And like Brett said, it's because you've lost the trust of the community. So we're gonna stay on the story, and obviously the Breonna Taylor story as well, and what happens to these police officers. Let's move on to another fun topic. Oh God. So, as we all know, instances of hate crimes, whether they be anti-Semitic hate crimes, Islamophobic hate crimes, or just general right-wing radicalized hate crimes have been on the rise in the United States. But that turns out to be the same in Canada, and specifically stemming from folks' digestion of right-wing news and media. That was the reason and the rationale that this landlord outside of Chicago gave for killing a 6-year-old supposedly. And that is the rationale that a man who murdered a Muslim family in Ontario gave just recently in court, saying that he started falling down, specifically a Infowars rabbit hole. His name is Nathaniel Veltman. He's 22 years old. And this was the 5th day of his trial, where he's facing first degree murder charges, 1 charge of an attempted murder, as well as terrorist charges. Veltman pled not guilty to the charges, but does not dispute that he ran down a family and wrote a manifesto just weeks before the killings. In an anti-Muslim screed he wrote before the killings and in a police interrogation, which was shown to the jury, Veltman said he hoped to inspire more white nationalist vehicle attacks. Again, he murdered a Muslim family in Ontario and using his car. His radicalization journey, he said during cross-examination by the Crown Tuesday, Veltman said he fell into white nationalist beliefs after falling down a radicalization pipeline. I consume libertarian content, mainstream conservative content, he said on the stand. Then I slowly started looking at some alt-right content on YouTube and then stumbled across some of the more fringe. The content he described focused on the Great Replacement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, his defense is saying that he was mentally ill, that he used drugs, and he used magic mushrooms on the night of the mass murder, which is like, what? Okay. Did he also eat a Twinkie? He has said also that it was something that he did sort of on a whim, that he saw this family and he killed them. But actually on the day of the killings, Veltman, even though he denied their intention to kill this family, he had a manifesto. He put on a military helmet, a bulletproof vest, and a white shirt with a cross on it that was a reference to an online meme about crusaders killing Muslims. So again, there is clear evidence that some of the things that people are digesting online are leading them to do these hate crimes. And of course, the victims here are Muslim also, but it is the same for, things like the Tree of Life synagogue massacre, right? Where you have dozens of elderly Jewish synagogue worshipers being murdered like this. My thing with all of this, Brett, is like, I don't think this guy, this 22-year-old, should escape any kind of consequences because he fell down a rabbit hole. But at the same time, where's the accountability for the ways in which the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm does? If you start with, sort of lightweight conservatives, you will get funneled into the Infowars universe. Infowars has been deplatformed from YouTube, but you will be funneled into more and more extremist things.
It's funny, well, not funny, but it's interesting that in the early days of the damage report, we did an interview with a reporter from Vox, I forget who it was, but who said that, like, listen, it's not just it's not an extremism problem the algorithm has, it's an extreme problem, because it's strange, it's interesting, it's probably bad that when you start looking into like YouTube videos about like vegetarianism, you then over time get into like the raw movement, the vegan raw, the most extreme dieting. If you get into workout, you get into the most extreme workout. And there is something about that is just probably bad for society. The question is to what extent. In different categories of things, it is different levels of depraved, horrible, and in this case, deadly. I agree with you, and I don't think anyone's saying this guy should not be held responsible for his actions. They were his actions, and I think that I don't think Alex Jones should be found guilty of murder, but he's not allowed on YouTube. So in those situations, like, they do take actions, and they need to take more actions like that. And I'm fine with it. I'm fine. And sadly, the main like counterweight that keeps it stable is advertising dollars.
Yeah.
So, say of that what you will.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's a decision that advertisers have to make as to whether they're going to continue to support these kinds of shows. And I guess I'm just like, the similarity for me is they're usually white men and they're usually young. I mean, it's like the right thinks there's a crisis with young white men. I would agree with them. I just think it's the opposite crisis, right? That they're turning that their angst, their hatred, or their angst and their sort of aimlessness, maybe, they're turning that on Muslim Americans, Muslim Canadians. They're turning that on immigrants. They're turning that against women. It's like, no, man, why don't we talk about, I don't know, lack of access to higher education, right? Like feelings of desperation and aimlessness based on work, economic situations, all that kind of stuff, lack of community. I do not try, again, no one's making excuses, but if we're looking at root causes for a lot of these things, one is that algorithm, and the other is that sense of desperation, I guess. I am tired of this story, and we need to end this hour. And this has been a long week, but we have more in the aftermath, and I promise we'll lead with something less heavy than this. If you're on linear, join us on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, stay tuned for the aftermath. We'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.